Hello everyone, I'm dropping a video to give you a summary of our meeting from last Wednesday. We thank you for everyone who came, and we will have our next meeting on Wednesday morning this week instead of tomorrow afternoon because it seems like that morning time works better for most people. In our first activity at the meeting, we talked about the definitions that you all posted for justice and bias and stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination. As we reflected on these definitions, we thought about how bias could be implicit and explicit. So explicit bias meaning you're aware of the bias that you're actually perceiving another person as, and then implicit is like you're not aware. It's a subconscious thing, and sometimes that a lot of times that happens where we don't even realize we have a bias, and we often speak and act out of that bias without even recognizing that we actually have a skewed perception of that person because of the social identity group that they belong to. We then moved on talking about stereotypes, and we defined stereotypes as being a step up from a bias, meaning that it's more of a generalization of a group of people or a type of person. And we thought about how are stereotypes created in the first place. And perhaps it's a way for people to try to understand a group of other people. And perhaps it's even based off of a true example of the way one person acted or behaved, but it's at its core, it is this oversimplified generalization of a person or a group of people based on some aspect of their identity. And a lot of times, and we talked about this in our meeting, stereotypes are rooted in fear and misunderstanding of the other. And it's a way to make somebody the other and to separate them from yourself. And so we acknowledged then, we talked about prejudice and how prejudice is really widespread, and we all have some type of prejudice in our mindsets and worldviews. And the only way to start undoing that process is to become aware of the prejudices that we have and to try to dismantle those. So we took some time to reflect on stereotypes that we've heard when we were growing up, that we've heard in New York, and to think about where they came from and how they affect our teaching at school. So then we decided to talk about isms, meaning what are the institutional level effects of discrimination in our society. So when we think about isms, we think about racism, sexism, ageism, and we began to think about how do isms play out systemically in our society. So for example, how are systems set up to fail people who are in poverty? One thing that came up in the meeting was talking about food deserts. So it's easy to be judgmental when we see somebody walking down the street giving their child unhealthy foods or McDonald's. And when we consider actually maybe they live in a low-income neighborhood. And in their neighborhood, they don't have access. It's a food desert. They don't have access to healthy, fresh, affordable food. And at the same time, while they're in a food desert, they have 5 different fast food chains. And so we thought about how are these systems set up to fail people, and how are they set up to continually make it hard for groups of people to even be different from the way that they're being judged in society. So that thinking about the ism, we thought about how it's different from a personal prejudice, and it's different from a personal bias. It's how a system or how a society discriminates on a group of people based on their social identity, whether it's being in poverty or being a different skin color or being a different religion. So for the next meeting, I handed everyone a questionnaire, and if you didn't get it, please and would like to take the questionnaire, please reach out to me and I can email you a copy as well. I gave everyone a questionnaire that is going to ask you to reflect personally on some isms that you've experienced. And then the next questionnaire is going to ask you to think about how do these isms actually affect my personal relationships and how do they affect my teaching and my relationships with people at work and at my school. So as you're doing these questionnaires, please lean into the discomfort, because when the uncomfortable feelings arise, it is just the first step in undoing some prejudices and biases that we might have ourselves. And the very first step is being able to acknowledge and be aware that you have these things. I'm not going to ask you to share your personal answers on the questionnaires, but at that next meeting, I will ask you to think, to reflect, to have reflected, and to think about what is a goal that you have and what is something that you'd like to work on based on the reflection that you had through this questionnaire experience. So carve out some time today or tomorrow to reflect on these questions and come ready to share on Wednesday morning about your experience. Thanks.